What's up everyone, welcome to today's video, welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So in the past few years, there have been a lot of different video game highlights. Some video games have basically taken the airwaves, and some of them have been pleasant additions but have not necessarily been able to steal the show. Now, there is one game nonetheless that really does highlight a lot of what I do on this channel, and that's Gotham Knights. Many of you know this channel or found this channel from me covering Gotham Knights content. But there is a video game that I actually am very excited for, if not almost more excited for than Gotham Knights, and that is the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order sequel that's going to be coming out very soon. The name of this game has just been recently announced as Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and it's going to be following the story with Cal Kestis and all of the above. Now, some of you may or may not know the game or may not know much about it, but there's some pertinent things that I really wanted to point out in this particular video. So hang in there and let's just walk through a few things that we already know. Now, one really interesting thing about the Star Wars Jedi game is it's actually being developed by one of EA's studio called Respawn. Now, many people who know EA's history with the Star Wars games know that it has been a very rocky relationship with the fans and EA. First of all, we want to go back and make sure that we point to the 2017 debacle with Star Wars Battlefront 2. This is where EA tried to release a microtransaction infested piece of work, and a lot of the community was not necessarily happy with it. In fact, Disney had to step into this fiasco for EA to then go ahead and make the game in a place where players could actually feel rewarded for their time and their effort. Nonetheless, the Star Wars Jedi franchise is being developed by Respawn. This is the development company that made the Titanfall games and makes Apex Legends. And now that they've already made one game under this Star Wars Jedi franchise, we know that they're capable of making good story-driven games with very solid combat. And so that's something that we have to go ahead and distinguish, because if you walk around the Twitters or if you look around the internet, you're going to see that a lot of people say things like, hey, we'd like another Battlefront game, or we'd like another game according to these Star Wars narratives that are out there. And I think one thing that's now necessarily known is that EA has basically lost that exclusive license to make Star Wars games, and many other studios are actually now able to engage. In fact, the studio that made the Beyond Two Souls or Detroit game is now also taking on one of the Star Wars games, I think, and we know for sure Ubisoft's massive studio, who is developing the Avatar game and who are the developers of Tom Clancy's The Division, are also taking on another major Star Wars game. So this is something that we really have to kind of pay attention to. And so the Star Wars Jedi game Survivor is going to be continuing that journey where Cal Kestis is basically moved from a Padawan who was lost and probably is going to then get a formative side of his story being told. We don't know if this is probably going to lead to a third game. I'm kind of hoping that it does, because the character, the protagonist, has kind of grown on me a little bit. And I think because of the Jedi story that Respawn is telling, there really are not a lot of Star Wars games right now that are telling a Jedi story. I mean, in the Star Wars universe, I don't know who your favorite characters are or who your favorite people group are, but I like the Jedi and I like the Mandalorian narratives. That's basically what I like. And so when you kind of put it all together, you really see that EA and Respawn, and even the director of that studio, has a very strong vision that people can rally around. Another thing too that we know about this particular game is that Cal Kestis is going to be the focus of this other Jedi story. Now, for those of you who are in the Batman and Gotham or Arkham space, you may or may not know, but he casted on Gotham, the TV show. Now, what's really crazy is I didn't know this because I watched, I think, season 1 of Gotham when it was first brought to TV, and I didn't follow up after that. For some reason, I think it got really dark and I started to lose interest because I just could not rally around a really young Bruce Wayne. For some reason, it just did not work out for me. I've been a Batman fan since I was a little kid, and the Batman that I know was already a grown man. And so seeing Batman and seeing all of the different villains in that light, or really young versions of them, did not necessarily resonate. This is not to say though that the show didn't have really good casting. I think it did. I think some of the actors were quite eccentric, but it didn't necessarily work out. So the actor nonetheless did put up a very stellar performance in the very first game, so that's definitely something that I'm looking forward to. Now let's move on to some aspects of the game. In terms of game mechanics, in terms of things like combat, open world traversal, I suspect that Respawn is probably going to try to match what they did in the very first game. The first Star Wars game was a semi-open world world game. It had a lot of interesting level design that made the game not monotonous in its exploration. You didn't necessarily have an extremely free to roam world, but you had these planets that gave you these structural areas and landscapes that you could actually explore, but they had a lot of levels and layering. This is something that really did work out for this game more than anything else, because as many would have thought, you can probably maybe just run around the open place, but these developers were smart enough because they wanted to tell a story. You can compare this game to, say, maybe the God of War game in 2018, where yes, you have a huge area to run around, you have different places that you can visit, but everything is still limited in a semi-gated way. This is basically a strategy that game developers use to tell a very strong story, and I think they did a very good job in making sure that you as the character understood how the world works, and then they could pretty much introduce you to different areas, different planets, and also you could expect different enemy types, different kinds of challenges when you got there. This provided a lot of depth for the game. I'm hoping that we get to see this in the next coming game, and it's something that I believe that fans are definitely going to appreciate, because the game is going to provide some familiar vibes as long as people already have been able to experience this aspect of gameplay and progression. And before I wrap up this video, I wanted to basically highlight the most critical aspect of this new project to me, and that is the combat. Most of you who've been watching the videos on this channel know that I really do appreciate some really solid combat in video games, and Jedi Fallen Order is one of the games where I really like the combat. Now, I have to confess, the combat is not necessarily the most polished combat that I've experienced in any game, but one thing I can tell you for sure is there is a lot of confidence as to the designers that do the combat for this particular game. One very interesting thing that I got to stumble over was the Twitter page of the combat designer on the Jedi team. His name is Jason DeHarris. He's not only a combat designer, he's actually somebody who was a competitive Street Fighter player, so he understands combat from a very interesting dynamic that I've not necessarily seen out there in public. Now, there might be other combat designers that also work on other video games that may be better, but he's one of the few that actually provides a lot of details surrounding combat from his blog and on his Twitter page, and basically does this to explain the different combat philosophies that you can see in various games. He's actually also pretty good at video games. In fact, some of his gameplay videos on his YouTube channel is insane. You could see the quality and you could see the way in which he implements his knowledge of combat systems and how he uses that to overcome challenges within any video game that he picks up. So these are just a few details surrounding the new Star Wars Jedi game that is slated to be coming out perhaps in about a year or so, maybe even earlier. In fact, the rumors right now are somewhere between Q1 of 2023 or maybe anything into the Q2 side of things. But so far so good. It appears that the game already has a strong footing in its first entry, and the acceptance from the audience at the time of its release was actually pretty good, and I think has given them enough confidence to want to continue the project. Anyways, I'll keep you guys up to date as much as I possibly can. Stay tuned and stay in touch for any more details regarding the Star Wars game that's supposed to come out next year. And thank you very much for watching the video. I really appreciate you guys so much, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Peace out.